So you entered VFX as a young woman. What was the inspiration behind joining the film industry? Where was your kind of moment of inspiration?
I think I've always been fascinated by the film industry, the TV industry, media in general, and, the digital medium. Like, I have always been a huge fan of art, specifically art in technology. And, I studied art in university and I focused more on photography and video production, but it was always something that was kind of in the back of my mind, but I had no idea if I could actually have a profession out of it, because to me it was like my hobby. I felt like ever since a young age, I always wanted to collage things together. I always drew. I always wanted to make things. And I think what draws me to specifically filmmaking is that it's such a lovely visual storytelling, right? And the great thing about visual effects is it's all of that, right? It's visual storytelling, it's creativity, it's so much cool technology. And I feel like I've stumbled upon VFX. I don't think I knew what it was originally. It was just something that I felt like my progression from learning more about tech, learning more about art just kind of drew me into that world. So to me, I feel like it was quite a surprise, but an amazing surprise because it's completely changed what my life has been.
Amazing. I did listen to one interview that you did, and given that we're both in London right now, I think we have to mention that you found some inspiration from the Spice Girls and ran a website and got into
Absolutely.
coding and graphics that way.
I mean, I'm sure people can't see it right now, but here's my Spice Girls Legos because
Oh, very cool.
I
On the
can't leave about them. Basically, yeah, I absolutely adored the Spice Girls growing up, and just found a really fun hobby of running a Spice Girls website. But it wasn't just a Spice Girls website for me. It was I got to do web design. I learned about web development, dived into HTML, JavaScript, and then eventually into more, CSS and future tech for that as well. But it was fun because in addition to that, it was I was doing photo manipulation to make graphics, or I was doing, back in the days, you had Flash animation. That was one way of doing animation back in the days. And then also with all the performances that they did, I would splice and edit together videos and do my own fan collages. So it was very much a great introduction into the digital realm for me. It was look at all these different things that you can make with your computer and share it with people in the community who also get super excited about everything that you make and share. It was just such a fun, positive, and collaborative environment where people just were super excited by any new thing you created. And so I absolutely fell into, the world of digital media because of the Spice Girls, which is a funny thing to say, but I absolutely love it. And
but it's great, and it's and I like the fact that there's no shame involved. It's kind of it's not even a guilty pleasure. It's just
no.
And also, I think there's a lot of people who think they, to run a website or to run a podcast or a fan site, that you have to be making money. But actually what you are doing in all of these processes, if you're creating anything, is learning throughout, isn't it? And you've been able to sort of amalgamate all those skills that you learned from doing the website and the videos and the graphics and the animation, and it's got you to where you are now in a big way.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it sounds very fangirl for me to say, I thank my career because of the Spice Girls, but I actually really do, because it really introduced me into the World Wide Web and the world of communities and fan communities, and what can happen in those communities. And a lot of it is so much creativity that people just want to find their niche communities to create, right? Yeah. And once they do, it's just overflowing with just amazingness and awesomeness. And, I think, we see that in so many other communities, fan communities, whether it be music or films or, video games. They're all just very much what did you do? Oh, cool. How'd you do that? So it's a very inquisitive, but also, supportive environment.
Yeah, definitely. And then when you arrived at ILM, straight into ILM, in terms of a visual effects career, you were initially working on as a compositor, is that right?
Actually, my first ever job at ILM was a digital resource assistant,
Right.
which that role doesn't exist anymore today. Most of the time, people know it as like a technical assistant role.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a lot of just like data management, file management, a lot of like, back in the days, we used to call them film outs. So, you know, before everything was digital, you would actually have to convert what is digital to then be processed onto film to then be shown in the movie theater. So we had this process with the film out process. And it was quite fun because I was like the first and the last to see every file that came in and out of the facility. And it was such a great education on every single part of the process within visual effects. Like I learned so much about the pipeline and the different departments and who does what. And for someone who like really had no idea what visual effects was, you know, the breadth of visual effects, because it encompasses so much. It was such an eye-opening position to go into. And, you know, I've learned so much from that. I wouldn't have wanted any other role but that. You know, there's a lot of younger folks these days trying to get into the industry who are like, oh, I want to be an artist right away. I already know what type of artistry I want to do. I want to be an animator. I want to be like, they're very like specific and keen to know about all, like to do that one specific thing. But to me, I think not knowing what I wanted to specialize in and then going into this role and seeing everything just really opened my eyes to like the differences. And, you know, like there's so many things you can get into. And that's the fun part, is like, they're all fun. How do I ever pick something? So I think there was kind of a journey from my first position as a research assistant to my position now, where I was like, what am I trying to focus on? What do I think I can do that will, you know, help with visual storytelling, that would help, you know, the facility and the company, and, you know, but also keep that culture of collaboration and innovation going on as well. So it was quite a journey. I'm still going through that journey. But, you know, it's, to me, even though I came from a more technical side originally, it still has led me to this amazing creative role that I have now. And, you know, the technical side still doesn't disappear, right? Because again, like I mentioned, technology constantly changes and progresses, and, you know, I'm kind of there to see and jump along with it. So
well, great to have that kind of role where you were able to get some perspective on all the different roles that could exist for you. Yeah, like you say, rather than trying to jump in at one place. And I know people in the TV industry that you know, they will pick a role and then they'll get stuck in that role because they haven't had the sort of experience outside of knowing how their department interacts with another department. And I see people get you know, stuck in the mud almost. But then you became a compositor. Yes. Now this podcast, I've spoken to lots of visual effects artists over the last couple of years since I've been doing it. But I don't think anybody has ever really explained in layman's terms what a compositor does and where they fit in the pipeline. I mean, a lot of my listeners will know, but I'm sure it'd be good for some that don't, for you to explain that if you could.
Yeah, I mean, compositing is such an interesting thing because, you know, the word composition is very key to a lot of art. And as a compositor, you're essentially the last person to essentially bring everything together and create that final shot that you see up on the movie screen. I definitely consider compositing as, in layman's term, maybe like advanced Photoshop, where you're essentially layering things to a certain degree together, from your plate photography to the CG, you know, renders to, you know, maybe some particle animation that you made yourself. Like it all fits in together, and you as a compositor decides what that final composition looks like. And the only difference is, you know, with film and TV, it's moving imagery, so you're looking at, you know, 24 frames per second. So a shot may be, you know, barely 1.5 seconds, but that's something along the lines of, you know, 50 to 100 frames that you have to, you know, make sure it's consistent across. And so, yeah, I think the thing with composition is I think about composition in so many ways. Like I see things in the real world and I think about how it's composed. I see things on TV and I'm like, how was that composed? Like it's a lot of just like, how do we, you know, use the lighting, use the color, use the the actors, the props, the sets that we have. How do we bring that all together to convey a specific message or story? And I think that's the fun and exciting thing about compositing.
Interesting that both of your jobs, the one you start with and the one that you have as a compositor, I know you're supervisor as well now, are both jobs where you were kind of seeing the final product kind of at the the pointy end of the pointy tip of the arrow, as it were.
Yeah, no, I think you actually make a good point, because that's one thing that I enjoy about, like, even now in my current role, is just like being part of the process in the beginning and being part of the process from the beginning all the way to the end. And it's like seeing that through is super exciting, because it starts off as like words on a page and suddenly it's this beautiful imagery, right? And like being able to see how that progresses is so exciting. It's so fun. And I'm constantly surprised, because I work with some of the best artists in the world, and you're just able to always see and create something new. It's just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. I think, many of the people I've spoken to, whether they're kind of, alumni, people like Ken Ralston and Dennis Muren, or whether they're new people like Todd Vaziri or Hal Hickel that I've spoken to, they all talk about this kind of family atmosphere at ILM that's been maintained over the years. And even though, you might be working remotely at home or in another office in another continent, do you still feel that kind of team effort to kind of push the shot over the line and get it done to the best of all of your abilities and support each other in doing so?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the thing that defines ILM is 100% the people. The people and the culture is what makes the company so great to work for. I mean, you've already mentioned so many of my colleagues, from Todd to Hal to, I've been around when Dennis was around as well, when he was still reviewing and being kind of like a, senior VFX supervisor, providing insight here and there, dropping into dailies, and you're like, Dennis came in, we better show the best stuff. But no, it's been such a great environment where everyone is so willing to teach, but also learn, right? Because we all know that things constantly change and there's new technology and new ways of doing things. And so it's such a fun, open collaboration where like OG generations like Dennis Muren can still ask questions to people who are fresh and new, out of university, because, they've done something that he's never seen before, and vice versa. And it's such a open environment where everyone is just so supportive and just so wanting to make the best and be the best. And that's such a rarity. And, even though ILM is such a global company these days, we have offices all around the world now. There's still, like, for me, I still very much still talk to people back in San Francisco, still talk to people in Singapore. Like, we have created a community where it's very easy for us to still be able to chat with one another, even if it's not related to work, right? So I feel like there's definitely been friendships created that are some of my best friends are people who work in my industry, and are people who have, very similar, pathways, but also different, end up locations as well. So it's been nice to see as the company expands that culture still exists.
Difficult to maintain, I would think, as it's grown so organically over the years, and much bigger than it was before.
Yeah, I mean, like, you've interviewed Todd, and I used to sit right next to Todd, and there was a group of us that used to sit kind of the same quarters for like 4 or 5 years. And even though like one of us is in Sydney now, I'm in London, and people are, thrown across different states, like we still, make it a point to do an annual call with each other, because we just want to see how everyone's doing. We've, created these friendships, and these, we know we can talk about certain things and they'll know what we're talking about. And, but at the same time, we want to, discuss what's going on with our industry right now. Things are changing, and even the film industry, there's a lot going on, and having people being able to, fall back on to have these conversations is absolutely vital, because it's healthy to keep these relationships alive.
Yeah. And is your location in London forgive my ignorance, is it purely based on the fact that there are lots of productions in London and you need to be there on that time zone? Or could you be doing a job in London that's for a film that's being shot in California, for instance?
I mean, it's really, dependent on projects, clientele, relationships that get built up, and overall plans. So like most of the time, because I'm based out of London these days, I tend to get projects that are UK based. But that doesn't stop me from also being able to, like, if suddenly they need to shoot in Iceland, fly over to Iceland to, get some footage. Or I may find myself back in LA again because, we need to shoot a certain stage because the actor's only available then. So it's totally, up to whatever the production plan or schedule is like. So for me personally, I feel like I'm a very worldly nomad and I go wherever the projects take me.
Was there a particular project that brought you there in the first place, though, to London?
Yeah, I mean, it was surprisingly, I did season 1 of Mandalorian. I started off in San Francisco. That was before we even started doing the stuff for shooting because we had so much to prepare for. And then I was on set for Mandalorian, doing all the real-time rendering, our LED volume setup for the first time. What was known as the Brain Bar, like all of that was in LA. And then after LA, I went back to SF a bit, but then they're like, oh, we're actually doing some of the work in London as well. And it was kind of a mixture of timing and also my partner's from the UK originally. So there was kind of a mixture of things that like landed correctly at the correct time. And so I was able to basically go from San Francisco to LA to London all for season 1 of Mandalorian because everyone had their hands on it in one way or another. And it was just really fun to be able to work with such different groups of people in every different site. Everyone has different ways of working and different skill levels and experiences. But at the end of the day, we were all still able to come together and kind of make this, final product that, essentially set the pacing for Star Wars episodics, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would imagine as well that your locations being in those different offices on a show as big as Mandalorian was and is allows for, work to be going on around the clock because of the time difference. You can be doing things while San Francisco sleeps and vice versa so that you get more hours in ultimately in the day.
I mean, it was definitely a well-oiled machine that, it was originally 8 episodes and it was, I think, one of the toughest projects because, we had a very high bar of the quality that we wanted. And everyone was just very passionate about making sure, we could get that across, even though it's, TV episodic, we still want that Star Wars quality. And, we definitely, I think, succeeded in doing that. And it is definitely felt across all our sites that worked on it.
I think, quite a lot of the people I've interviewed have worked, both in the optical domain and the digital domain. But actually, one of the things that's really interested me as I've spoken to people more of your generation is how VFX has developed from a post-production, entirely post-production, job to being a job where you're actually on set, you're interacting with actors, perhaps, you're there as the stuff's being shot initially. How have you found that switch to its location in the pipeline? Has it been something that was difficult to budge ILM in the direction of initially because of all those years of having done it the other way around? Or was it adopted relatively easy?
I mean, I think the one thing that virtual production has done is make it more common, but it's always, been there where we want VFX supervisors and artists when production is happening, right? Because if we're out there on set, we're able to advise and consult and, help steer making the VFX work when it needs to be done in post a lot more smoother of a transition as opposed to, being completely shocked where it's like they show everything and they gave it to us and we're like, now we have to make it work and everything is, lit wrong or like our blue screens are not even or, they didn't take into account that this vehicle was going to animate through and, it's just very key to have post incorporated in regular production, even pre-production, right? Because whatever you plan earlier is going to affect how you handle things at the end. And if you don't want it to be a giant mess, then definitely include VFX from the start. But, for me personally, it was quite a shock going from, like, in the world of compositing, you're generally in a very dark room. It's very rare I have my window open, which is sun shining brightly through.
Yeah, it's baking here in London today. Yeah, I'm roasting as we speak.
Usually I would have my blinds down, lights all off, and it's like I want the most dark room because I need to have the most color accurate monitor so that I can make sure everything is properly represented as possible. And usually it's like you and a couple people huddled together in a small area. And you're just like, usually I would be headphones on, music blasting, and just like in the zone, right? Like you're making your shot, you're kind of like lose track of time. And so I kind of went from that kind of work environment to suddenly being thrown on set where it's like, oh, wow, there's like so many different departments, so many different people who are like, don't stand there. Oh, can you help me with this? Oh, what's that going on? Like, it was just an abundance of people asking questions, but also like, you trying to help them, and all in a very tight amount of time, right? And so it went from being able to work on a shot for like 3 months to like, cool, can you finish a shot in like 2 minutes because we have to start shooting and then we have to move on to the next take.
Wow.
So the pace was absolutely, night and day in terms of difference, and also the amount of people that I was interacting with. So it was a shock, but it was completely thrilling. Like, it was such a adrenaline rush of just being like, all right, I have less than 5 minutes to light, compose, and set up this, LED to work with this practical set. Can I do it? Go. And, it was thrilling. It was a rush. And when you do get it, it's always it's a satisfying feeling.
Yeah.
And especially when, the cinematographer, you're generally working right alongside with them and they're like, yeah, that's a really nicely set up shot. And you're like, yay, I did well.
and a big change for them as well, for directors and DOPs, because they have to get involved now with a technology initially that they probably didn't have an understanding of. And you were kind of teaching them, you were kind of taking the reins to a certain extent.
I think we were all learning at the same time.
Yeah, right.
Which was the fun thing, because, blue screens have existed, projection screens have existed. We've used them before, but now we have the ability to manipulate live, right? And that's where it's like, oh, that's what people need to learn about. It's like, it's not just an image that we're putting behind folks. It's an image that you can manipulate to work with whatever tone, feeling, style that you want. And you see the results right away. And, I think especially for actors, they can finally be in an environment that they can understand and see what it is, as opposed to just acting for a green screen. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. I think you're an amazing actor if you can totally imagine and place yourself in a location. But personally, for me, I'm like, if I have no idea where I am, it's really hard to actually, I
hope I'm not triggering you right now with my green screen behind me.
No, not at all. I mean, I have lived a life of green screens.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And, it's not like LEDs are the answer to everything, right?
Yeah, of course.
The use case scenarios where green screens are needed, blue screens are needed. But for the use case scenarios where LEDs are brilliantly executed, it just, completely like eliminates the fact that you're not in a real location. But, psychologically, you're looking at things and you're like, this looks real.
I was talking to Pablo Hellman just a couple of nights ago, and I spoke to the guys, TJ Fours and Mo and Leo and Scott Pritchard for the Andor panel I did at Celebration for ILM, and they were talking about using the LED panels for the windows in Mon Mothma's apartment, and Pablo was talking about using the stagecraft for the car scene when the mother's taken them off to chase the hurricane and stuff, and scenes where you wouldn't necessarily think, because I think we're used to having seen The Mandalorian with this huge wraparound screen, or The Batman with this huge wraparound screen. But it's interesting now how it's being used it's always being used as a tool, but it's now being used as a tool for the thing that works best for that particular small part of the shot. It doesn't have to be this huge thing. It can just be something that sells the shot. And it's interesting what you said about the actors, because Pablo was saying as soon as the actors were in that car, they were in a moving car, because the car was moving, the background's moving, and suddenly you've got reactions that you wouldn't get in a situation where you'd normally be in a blue screen or a green screen.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the use case scenarios of blue screen and green screens are exactly what LEDs are best for, which is outside windows or environment extensions, right? And, we've definitely done a lot of car footage, spaceship footage. And like you're saying, actors absolutely just, get mentally into the location. And it's fun seeing that, because even when we do crazy things with like spaceships flying around, sometimes they'll be like, whoa, getting a little seasick here.
Yeah.
And I've definitely felt that too, where I'm just like, yep, need to step off.
Especially when it's moving around and yeah.
I mean, it very much feels like, your immersive experiences at theme parks that we have today. It really takes you out of this world, pun intended. And it's just so exciting to see what we can do with it. I feel like we're just hitting the basics of it right now. And, we're going the safe route of like, cool, we can do it for these things. What else can we do it?
Yeah.
With it? And, we're experimenting each and every project that we use stagecraft in.
When you were initially doing the stuff for Mandalorian, were you coming across issues where, and this is me just thinking off the top of my head really, where you would have built the environment, you've got it up on the LED screens, and then it's interacting with the set in a way that you hadn't expected in terms of color temperature or lighting? So did you ever have to kind of adjust the color correction of the actual physical set in post, or adjust the LED screens to account for that?
It was a mixture of both. I think that was the one thing that surprised us the most when we turned on the screens for the first time with an actual practical set there. And I think a great example was, we had this kind of desert scene with, mountainous rocks and sand, and they've had the sand for the longest time ever, and we've seen the sand, and we're like, cool, the sand is kind of this yellowish tone. We put the sand in, and what we didn't realize is that because our rocks were kind of this pinkish magenta color to it, that was being emitted from the LEDs onto the sand, and suddenly our sand was more of a purple color, and we're like, what? We weren't expecting that. So we actually had to reduce some of the saturation of the rocks so that it wasn't as saturated on our actual practical sand. And so you're always thrown up with things like that, where once you actually put up, like, let's say a sunset, the sunset, of course, is clearly going to affect the lighting on your set. Therefore, do you have reflective material? Like, what is the material of your set? And will that change your overall tone and look of the scene? It's like, in things like Batman, right? We're talking about grungy and dark. And if you throw up a beautiful orange sunset, suddenly you're like, oh, this is not usually the color palette of Batman. We're going to have to tone it down in one way or the other. And so it's a constant surprise every time you go on set, because you have an idea and an image of what it will be, but you never really know how much the LED lighting affects the set until you get there.
I think there's a perception that, initially that stagecraft and the volume was like the answer to all of the problems in visual effects, when really, and there's that old, was it Orson Welles that said something about, what's the line? It's the enemy of art is the absence of limitation, or something like that. But of course, there is limitation with this technology. It is just another tool, and you can't always use it. Sometimes you might have to go to a location, like I know on Andor there was lots of location shooting, for instance, because that's what the aesthetic of that show needed to be. It's not like everything's going to be produced in front of one of these giant screens now.
No, not at all. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, what is the most cost efficient and effective thing to do, right? And in some cases, to be able to visually tell, like, let's say we want this to be Coruscant, what looks like Coruscant? Making a brand new Coruscant digitally? Or is it, oh, hey, we've used Canary Wharf before, can we just use it again and, extend and make it look like? There's just so many foundations that already exist in the places that, we live and around the world. And I think that's what that's what actually grounds visual effects the most, is when we can tie it to something we can relate to.
Yeah.
If we can relate to things that we see every single day, then we're like, ah, that is what maybe the possible future will look like on another planet.
Yeah.
Because we are still human and we're still taking our human ideas to different parts of the world. But, you know, if we have this like brutalist architecture that we're so used to of the Barbican, then why not take that and make it look futuristic?
Yeah, I think it was Moen who said to me in the Andor panel that even if they replace 95% of a shot sometimes, just having that initial proper grounded reality of a genuine location was really useful to them to kind of, you know, pin their perception on almost, you know, and to sort of compose the shot better.
Yeah, I mean, I've known and worked with Moen for a while now, and I think the great thing about ILM is you can kind of hear similar things between all of us after a while, because we've all kind of learned from one another. And there's this like generational aspect of visual effects, which I think is very unique to ILM, since, you know, ILM's been around since the 70s. And so there's just this really fun thing of like, you know, let's say Dennis Marion first did something, then on the next round, he then teaches someone else, and then let's say another round, another person, and somewhere down the line, John Knoll is there, and then John Knoll is learning from Dennis Marion, and then John Knoll has been teaching all these other people like Todd Vaziri, and then I've been learning from Todd Vaziri as well. And it's just like generational information that's being passed down, but also with, you know, very much open minds of like, what else can we do that ties our, you know, previous past innovations with the future. Because, you know, things like stagecraft and virtual production aren't that new. We've done, you know, rear projection screens for forever. Like, how many car footage from the 50s have you seen? Like, it's the exact same concept. It's just we've now taken that and used new technology that allows us to do even more. So it's a lot of rehashing the same things, just in a new perspective, essentially.
Talking of taking something old and making something new of it, you worked on the Star Wars sequels, and you did some shots with the Millennium Falcon, I understand, or Falcon, depending on how you want to say it. What did you do in terms of your research for that, and what did you do then to kind of bring something new to it?
Oh, I feel like I'm gonna sound like the worst Star Wars nerd ever.
You're talking to me. This is fine.
I mean, the thing is, like, my level of like understanding all the every little bits and details and like blueprints and plans of Star Wars ships is very surface level. And, you know, I was able to work on some Falcon shots on Last Jedi, specifically when it was like the Battle of Crate and flying through the Crate location. But, you know, to me, it was very much, as with any time I'm bringing a classic Star Wars ship into a more present day Star Wars universe, is how do I bring and look at the past? Because that is the foundation. That is what everyone is used to looking at. And it's constantly being referenced. Like, to me, being able to see the actual models, you know, and how light interacts with those models is so important, right? Like, it has a matte finish, which is very, you know, not something common for spaceships, right? When you think of things that NASA creates, it's very reflective, it's very specular. And all these Star Wars ships are never that. And in fact, they're always like grungy, matte, with like so many different pieces and panels, and the detail is just insane. But, you know, we've kept that throughout every, whether it be the Falcon or a Star Destroyer, or bringing back, you know, a Colin Cantwell piece like the Cruiser, right? Like,
that was great.
We've never been able to see that before on film, but that design existed from, you know, the original trilogy, and being able to like bring it to life again now with all this new technology, we're still referencing like, how did the original model look like? How did the Star Destroyer models look like? Because that's our basis for the Cruiser. And just like, you know, every little detail from every material and piece that they use is very much things that we try to replicate in, you know, our 3D digital world these days, and it's so much fun because it's preserving the past, but at the same time giving it a whole new look.
Yeah. It's so great that, ILM has managed to have that continuity of, staff over the years. Even people that are left to go and do other things, they're still part of ILM and they still go to the reunions and things. I know there was the Return of the Jedi reunion recently that Rose sorted out, and it's great to see so many faces kind of come back, but also to have that continuity of having that resource of that archive that George began to create, back in 76. So canny to be able to, think to have all those photographs taken and all that behind the scenes material shot back in the day, which is still being used now. I mean, you only have to look at Rogue One, and they're using outtakes of X-wing pilots,
amazing,
which is insane.
Right?
Yeah,
and it's not it's not just the photography or the film or footage that hasn't been used before. It's like everything from the trilogy to the original prequels to the new trilogy that we have now. All of the props, all of the costumes, things like that. Someone has it stored somewhere in the archives, right? And like whether it be back in California or like somewhere out here in Pinewood, like there are still physical materials of things that we can always refer back to. And it's so rare to have, that continuous history just growing still. But it's so fun to be part of it because, it was funny. I was actually at a Lightyear panel recently. This is Pixar's Lightyear, where because we're all under the Disney hat umbrella these days. We also get to share a lot of our technology, which is amazing because what they've developed at Disney Animation, at Pixar, it's a lot of similar foundations and bases as visual effects. And so I guess they were looking to make spaceships, and they're like, oh no, we haven't really done spaceships to this level, but we actually have friends across the bay who really know how to make spaceships. I wonder if we could use some of that. And they contacted us, and we were able to share, parts of our ship library with them, and
nice.
They used parts of that in Lightyear, which was really, slightly heartwarming to use because I think every, nerdy kid has built some kind of Star Wars model kit one way or the other, and being able to see it in digital form and make something else out of it is super exciting.
Yeah, one of those people that I know would have played with all those toys as a kid is Gareth Edwards, who you worked with recently on The Creator. I know we can't talk in depth or in detail about that project, but Gareth is somebody whose career I've watched very closely because I remember when Monsters first came out, and also he's a friend of mine as well. So, I get little insights from my friend. Amazing to be working on a project that kind of just surprised everybody when that trailer dropped. Nobody was expecting something so epic looking. Did you have fun working with Gareth?
It was so nice to be able to, still have that relationship with Gareth since Rogue One, and continue that relationship into The Creator. And, there were a lot of things I feel like he took from creating Rogue One that went into The Creator. And, his love of visual effects. I mean, he was originally a visual effects artist, right? So like he knows this industry. He knows what is needed to make a shot, but he's just such a visionary and such a, it's so incredible what his mind has created with The Creator. And, it's just really exciting to see him branch out on his own. And they're 100% that man has been influenced by Star Wars without a doubt, because there were definitely times where it's all like, yes, we're not doing Star Wars, but
it's so difficult.
We can make something look kind of like something else, then that would be awesome,
Yeah.
And he was working with a lot of people who have worked on Star Wars, so it's no surprise that things may look very similar between the films, but at the same time, it's so unique. It's a story that I haven't, heard of or seen in any way, but it's still got heart to it, which is really nice.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, actually. Are you you worked on Andor season 1. Are you working on season 2 as well?
I am not working on season 2, but the Andor world is still very much within my presence. And they're all filming right now, which is great. And it'll be a lot of new exciting things for season 2 for sure.
Yeah,
Had
yeah,
little snippets here and there, but can't really
yeah, of
disclose
course.
anything.
As much as you watch your colleagues, doing projects that you might have worked on previously, like Andor, or you might be looking at a film that some colleagues have been working on, do you also kind of keep an eye on other effects houses to see how things are developing there? Is that something, I'm sure it's something that's done, the head of technology at ILM, for instance, might be, looking, of course, is looking across that stuff. But, you as an individual, when you go to the cinema, are you kind of going, huh, how did
Oh,
they do that?
absolutely.
Or that's cool. I'd like to know how that works. Or,
Yeah, I mean, I think the crazy cool thing about the London visual effects community is that there's so many visual effects houses. There's so many people in the industry, and they're all kind of in the same-ish area. Like, I feel like Soho is like the hub for it all. And we never had that in San Francisco. Like, in the Bay Area, you had ILM, you had Pixar across the bay, you have smaller companies like back in the days Orphanage, and there's also Evil Eye and Whiskey Tree. But I think the fun thing about the London culture is, something that I had to learn was very much everyone likes going to the pub at the end of the day,
oh,
right?
yeah.
And I feel like every office kind of has their own set pub that everyone goes to. But at the same time, it'd be like, you go to, let's say, Frame Stores, kind of the closest one next to ILM. We might end up meeting at the Frame Store pub, and then people at Frame Store are there, ILM people are there, and everyone's just like, oh, cool, I've been doing this, can't really say anything, but, can talk about how, oh my God, I've been doing crazy out. Like, you just have, once again, a community of people that you can at least, vent out and rant and like discuss things. And, to me, I feel like every visual effects company these days are doing absolutely top-notch quality, right? Like, especially because of COVID and lockdown, and suddenly there was this burst of like streaming content, and everyone just had to do work all the time, but also the bar was so high on the quality because everyone's like, I want Game of Thrones, quality VFX these days. Just like every company has pushed their quality so high that I feel like I'm constantly amazed with what I see these days. And everyone's using such innovative ways of doing visual effects, right? Like, there's some really impressive things that people have done, from little things like, oh my God, we have machine learning working for automatically rotoing people. Like, that's exciting to me.
Yeah, yeah.
To like, oh man, we can actually do fast and efficient de-aging, or to do stunt to main actor, face replacement. Like, everyone is doing really impressive new things and really pushing the bar on how we can take our technology. And it's really inspiring to see what other companies are doing. Without a doubt, Weta with Avatar has really pushed the grounds once again. And, you see what like working 10 years on a project with the time, the resource, and the, R&D to build all this tech can do. And so, there's always that, like, you feel like you've hit the top of the curve. I feel like we're still climbing that curve.
Yeah. I think there has been, the general press seems to have this sort of generally negative connotation to it. But like you said, if you can use AI to rotoscope somebody out of a shot, and it removes that heavily manual process that, an artist would have to do for hours and hours, days and days. I mean, surely that frees up time, that frees up budget. That means that we're going to get an improvement in effects. And I always think as well with effects that, we've striven for so many years for kind of photorealism, but at the same time, there's the non-NPR, as people call it now. Do you think there's going to be more of those kind of movies coming out? Like, I recently just saw the second Spider-Verse film, which is just, it's just incredible. I mean, I'm sure I only consumed about 20% of what was thrown at me on that screen. But do you think there are going to be more of those kinds of movies where they strive to be more stylistic than rather striving for photorealism?
100%. I mean, I think people have the appetite for that, right? At the end of the day, we just want to have stories that we can relate to. And if those stories have a semi different visual style, I think that's cool. It's totally, a different way of, again, telling a story. And to me, I actually feel like we're in a interesting, like, not quite a golden era, but it's a very impressive era for animation. And I'm very much in the camp of animation is just as much a regular film as a live action film. There's absolutely no difference between them. Acting is amazing, writing is amazing. You know, like it all requires the same things to make an excellent film. And to me, it's just been so impressive, the animation films that have been coming out. I mean, I was super wowed by Guillermo del Toro's latest Pinocchio.
Yeah.
It was just, again, this is some old school methods of stop motion animation, but also, new methods of animation, all brought in together, and at the same time telling a very sad, brutal, and, eye-awakening story of Pinocchio that's not just, shiny, happy rainbows. So, we want those types of stories. We want to see those different perspectives. And it's not, animation is not just a kid thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is very much for everyone. And I think people are really starting to get that now. And, we have more people in our industry who are fighting for animations to be nominated for Best Film. And rightly so.
Yeah, animation is not a genre,
No.
It's, my mother-in-law thinks it is, though. As a last question, I just wanted to talk a little bit about your Women in VFX project that you started a few years ago now, because I have to say, in doing this podcast where I'm talking to people about 80s, 90s, 2000s-ish movies, there are a lot of white old guys that I'm talking to.
Yes.
And most of the women that I've spoken to have been in roles like production manager or location manager or administrative roles. But of course, the industry's changed a lot, and it's important to you, I'm sure, looking at some of the videos of your Women in VFX project today. It's great to see that representation. I have 3 young daughters, and I want to show them, and I'm sure like you do as well, you want to show people that it's not just a job for guys.
I mean, it's always that, stereotype of, oh, it's like a tech job. That means it's more math and sciences, so clearly it's for guys. But it doesn't matter, right? Like, it's creative in technical ways, it's creative in aesthetic ways. It's, at the end of the day, like I said, it's about visual storytelling. And I feel like if you're a person who wants to be able to, speak what you want to speak via visual imagery, it's such a great industry to be in. There's just so many, really creative folks who are so open-minded and also just embracing of learning and growing that, like, I couldn't have asked for a good environment. Like, it's a tough industry to get into, but at the same time, the women who are in the industry, whether it be women, people of color, LGBT folks, like, it's such a great mixture, and having that mixture is what makes the storytelling better, right? Because if you have a group of people who are all the same, a homogeneous environment, who all think the same, you're going to have very boring stories to tell, right? Like, what makes, the films that we see so exciting is that we're seeing a story, we're, experiencing something that we've never experienced before. And I feel some of the best visual effects work comes because all these different people from different backgrounds have put their perspective into it. And it's something new and refreshing that the audience hasn't seen. So to me, it's all about making a more inclusive environment and bringing in the best people from all around the world of different backgrounds, because that's how we get those unique stories, and those unique moments. So absolutely, I think, we should have more women in the industry. I think it's been getting better. I've been in the industry for 15 plus years now. And when I first started, there were a few, and now I would say there's definitely more. But, the main thing is, are we helping them to learn and grow and get the best out of them to, be in the positions such as like visual effects supervisor or creative director or art director or production designer, because those are the people who are making those creative decisions. And once you get all those people together, it's bound to be an excellent project.